Welcome to the Athlete Mental Health Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Schmidt, off-road endurance athlete and mental health mentor. If you're really serious about getting that next PB, you can't overlook taking care of your mental health. Because although mental health and sport performance might seem completely unrelated, when you look at how your body actually works, you'll find out that they're two sides of the same coin, which means prioritizing your mental health will boost your sport performance. I'll dive deep into the scientific connections between mental health and sport performance and give you practical strategies that will get you to the root of your depression and anxiety so that you can feel your best and perform even better. Hey team, and welcome back to the Athlete Mental Health Podcast, or welcome if this is the first time you're tuning in. We are in for a real special treat today. I've got Fiona Groves here. We are going to be chatting about all things menopause, perimenopause, and for any of our male listeners that are here as well, because I know that there's a lot of you out there, this is not just an episode for the women. There's going to be some stuff here for the men as well, because I know that you have women in your life, and this is going to be something that you're going to need to know about as well. So Fiona definitely has some good perspectives on that too. So one for the ladies, but do not shut this off, guys, because you need to know this stuff too. So great to have you here today, Fiona. Thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to make my husband listen to this when it's live. So
That's awesome.
He's very much involved.
Maybe we'll have to get him on here for like the part two. living with women in menopause or perimenopause.
Oh, he has experience.
Nice. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Let's talk just a little bit about you to get started here. Tell us a bit about you, who you are, and how you got into the world of perimenopause, menopause, and being a menopause coach.
Yeah. So I'm a menopause coach. I'm also a fitness trainer and nutrition and eating psychology coach. I'm also a body image coach and then a yoga teacher as well. So I definitely wear many, many hats. I also just recently attended the World Menopause Congress in Melbourne, which was an incredible experience. And then for me, I'm 45. And I believe I've been in perimenopause since like 37 or 38. And like my perimenopause journey is one of the reasons why I decided to become a menopause coach. I kind of kept hearing over and over again, either through my own experience or other people's experience, about how there was just like a lack of understanding and support. And I was like, wow, like there needs to be more information, knowledge, and awareness here. And then I did have someone tell me that I was too young to be in perimenopause when I was probably in my early 40s. And I was like, and this was a healthcare provider. And I was like, wow, I know that I'm in perimenopause. I have an amazing GP here in Canmore. And she actually helped me diagnose me being in perimenopause in my late 30s. So when this other healthcare provider mentioned that, and through no fault of her own, like there is not enough or sometimes none at all training on menopause in medicine, I was like, wow, I know that I'm in perimenopause and I know so much about it already, but how many people have no idea? And so then they're told this information and they just believe that information. So I was like, you know what? I need to do this not just for myself, but for women all over the world. So yeah. And then I'm an athlete myself. So I compete in bodybuilding and CrossFit. I'm going to do my first strongman competition next year. So, and I mean, I compete as a really proud masters athlete. So I'm super, super honored to be on this podcast because like we are going to be talking about athletes. So
yeah. And it's so exciting because I mean, I know at first glance, I guess sometimes people will kind of be like, what does perimenopause and menopause have to do with mental health? But like, it has a huge impact on mental health, which is exactly why I've got you here today. And because you're an athlete and because you work with athletes as well as a fitness trainer, and from the mindset side and all of the pieces kind of put together, you have a really great perspective on all of these issues, which is really fantastic. So it's going to be a good conversation.
And I think it's important too, just to kind of just explain exactly what menopause is too, because there's a lot of confusion out there. Like people, I'll come across, especially women who are like in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and they're like, no, I'm past that, when actually they're in it. So, like the definition of menopause is 12 months without a menstrual period. Now that's a tricky definition because some women are they're in menopause through medical intervention. So it could be chemotherapy or it could be a full hysterectomy, including the ovaries removed. And then some women who are on an IUD, they may not be getting their periods. So like it is a bit of a tricky definition, but the key takeaway there is that menopause is a single moment in time. It is just
Okay.
one moment in time. After that moment in time, a woman is in postmenopause, and that's for the rest of her life. The transition period, kind of like normally diagnosed with symptoms, leading up to menopause is perimenopause. And then the years before that, so basically when a woman starts her period, and then to perimenopause is called premenopause. So like it's important for people to understand because especially like if we're working with athletes who are like 60, 65, 80, 90, right? Like we still need to know that these hormonal changes still have an impact. So like we're either getting ready for it or in it. So,
Right.
yeah.
That's a really great distinction. And thank you for laying that out because the hormones change so much at all of those different phases. And you're right. Athletes at all ages need to have some, like, we need to be considering our hormones at any age. And even more so, I think beyond that, now what did you call it? I'm going to mess it up. Pre-menopause from when you start your period till before perimenopause.
Mm-hmm.
That pre-menopause period, it's important, but becomes even more important from perimenopause to postmenopause, I think, to start looking at that stuff and how it connects to our mental health as well, which is super, super important too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
tell us a little bit, Fiona, about your own mental health journey and how maybe perimenopause has played into this for you in the more recent years.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, like, and I'm very open about this, I have, excuse me, I have quite an extensive eating disorder history. And then I also have a very extensive unhealthy body image background as well, especially in my teens and then my 20s and then into my 30s as well. And that's actually what prompted me to get certified in eating psychology. And then as I've gotten older, I've started to understand that I do believe that hormones actually played a huge role in both of those challenges that I had when I was younger. Because in 2017, I was officially diagnosed with PMDD. It's premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Just think of it as a really extreme form of PMS. But I had suffered from this all my life. And it was like my periods were like, well, my PMS and my PMDD when I was younger was so extreme. And then it's interesting because kind of like puberty, perimenopause, it's like a bookend, right? So things started to get really bad in my late 30s. And it now makes total sense because it was basically when I was transitioning into perimenopause. So I was starting to experience extreme symptoms that were as bad as they were when I was in my teens. And it makes sense because it's that bookend, right? And how a woman's symptoms in puberty will often be an indicator of what her symptoms are going to be like in perimenopause.
Interesting.
So for me, I got that diagnosis and it makes sense because it was getting worse. And then like perimenopause was definitely that kind of trigger to kind of make my PMDD so bad to the point where I did have to go and get medical intervention and I am medicated for it. And then what I've definitely found recently with regards to perimenopause is for me, definitely more anxiety. So, anxiety is something that I'm definitely aware of that I am dealing with. And like for me as well, like I'm an entrepreneur, so it's like I can get quite overwhelmed and like taking on like lots of stuff, juggling training, all this kind of stuff. So, um, yeah, like it all impacts it impacts my journey, it impacts other people's journey. So yeah, it's like symptoms, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. We often don't realize how much effect they have on our mental health, whether that's directly or indirectly. So for me, like vasomotor symptoms, so night sweats are a big thing for me. Like they're definitely a lot better now. But when they're bad, then I'm lacking in sleep. And then that carries over and has a huge impact on my mental health.
Which makes total sense. It's funny. I was
Hmm.
just talking to a friend about this yesterday, like the impact of sleep and mental health. And it's like you say, it's not just the symptoms that you're having. It's not just the hot flashes that are impacting your mental health. It's all of the things that are connected and
Hmm.
so indirectly and directly having an impact. Yeah, it's
It's
interesting all of those pieces of that puzzle, hey, like with PMDD and how like it's amplified when you're young, when you're going through puberty, and then again when you're at that other side of the bookend with perimenopause as well. And I think it's quite common to see that where our anxiety, especially anxiety, is flared at kind of those two ages because the hormones fluctuate so much in such a drastic way. So sometimes we think, and this is the case for some people, where anxiety is more of a situational thing where it's like a specific situation is causing the anxiety. So like sport performance anxiety is an example. It's like your sport is causing the thing. But it's not all about that. It's not just stress that causes anxiety of whatever sort that might be. It can also be things that are happening physically in your body that you can't see. So you could be
hmm
living the best life possible, but if your hormones are wickety whack, or you're
Kitty
transitioning
whack, I
through
like
some
it.
sort of, yeah, if you're transitioning through something with your hormones, whether that's just normal dysregulation, not normal, let's say common dysregulation in your life, then you could be experiencing anxiety there too. So I'm really glad
Hmm.
that you brought that up.
And it's to go back to sleep. A lot of people have said they're like, what was your biggest takeaway from the conference that I went to, the World Menopause Congress? And it was actually like I'm always talking about sleep and the importance of sleep and just how much it trickles down into every other aspect of our life, how it increases risk of disease. And sleep was mentioned at the Congress over and over and over again. And I was so happy to hear, like, because it was a medical conference, just like everyone basically preaching about the importance of sleep.
That's amazing because I preach it too. It's so like even I noticed it in myself. Like I even just last week I had like the full moon. I don't know. I don't sleep on the full moon for whatever reason, but then it just like kicks me for like 3 days. Like I don't get a good sleep and I'm like
Yeah.
everything is just a little sensitive. Anxiety starts to flare in
Yeah.
like the weirdest places where it's been under control. So knowing that that's just one connection is to mental health, but then also understanding that it's not just going to be your mental health that's impacted. It's so many other systems and your sport performance too is always
Mm-hmm.
impacted.
Yep.
Uh, Sleep is key.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I thought of as you were talking there is athletes experience anxiety so different. And I think that there's this kind of idea, and I'm hoping that by having this podcast, this will bust this kind of myth that's out there, but that athletes don't experience anxiety or depression because their sport or their training or whatever is going to be like the antidote or the antidepressant, for example, for their sport. So, like, you're an athlete, I'm an athlete, we've both experienced anxiety while training. Like, what does your anxiety look like?
Yeah, well, for me, and I mean, it's not anxiety per se, but like I, because I'm medicated for my PMDD, I typically don't get mood swings as a symptom of perimenopause, but I've had one mood swing, and I was working out at the time. I was at CrossFit, and we were doing a workout, and things weren't going right, and I all I can describe it was almost like an out of body experience. Like I had no control about how I was reacting. My emotions kicked in. And the more wound up I got, like the less I was able to do the task that I was meant to do.
Mhm.
Um, so that was just like one experience. But for me, it's putting pressure on myself to perform in a certain way, and
Mhm.
then having potential disappointment if I don't perform in a certain way. um, Getting anxious about, like, say, like competitions and things like that. Um, Comparison is a
Mhm.
big thing. So that then can start to create some anxiety because it's like we're comparing ourselves to others and then we're putting basically more and more pressure on ourselves. Um, For me, it's like, yeah, it's just like I get overwhelmed at like basically wanting to perform at the highest possible standard. And like sometimes it just takes over and then it has the opposite effect and performance suffers.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's huge. And it seems like it shows up like for you predominantly in your sport. Is there any other ways that it shows up like in your life at all? Maybe in your business or other places?
Yeah. For me, and I mean, I intertwine feeling overwhelmed and anxiety for me because they very much go in towards each other. So it's like, for me, I get really uh, like um, like my heart rate increases. I get really tense,
Mhm.
and for me, it's like I panic. So anxiety presents as panic for me, and I start to like panic about like say not getting everything done. Um, for me, I get anxiety if I don't get to bed
Mhm.
early enough because then like because I know that my body needs 7 to 9 hours sleep a night. So um, for me, it's like yeah, it's like I get like quite tense. I get panicky, and then like my husband will agree with it, but it's like I then tend to like make rash decisions, like
Mhm.
panic decisions. So yeah, that's definitely how anxiety presents in me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing that because that's a very everybody's anxiety looks so different and it's good sometimes to hear um I'm sure there's somebody listening to this that has a similar experience to you. So just knowing that, like, oh, yeah, okay, that's anxiety for me too. And feeling that connection can be really helpful in navigating some of that.
Yeah, and
So,
like for me, yeah, it's like that, like you can't get your breath, and it's like for me, it's that panic. It's like I don't have enough time. And then anxiety that I'm not going to be able to deliver to my clients. And then I'm not going to have enough time to work out. And then, yeah.
it all just starts to snowball.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's the joy. Yeah, the anxiety that I have too snowballs. It's often time related, and then it just like yeah, it's and especially when you have a busy schedule, it's easy for that to happen.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, when I got officially diagnosed for my PMDD, one of the things that like for me, it was like when I went to the doctor, I was like, do I have depression? Do I have anxiety disorder? Because I was having like severe panic attacks, anxiety attacks. But what it was creating for me was almost like a bipolar tendency.
Hmm.
So there was no happy medium. I was either extreme high or as low.
Hmm.
And then because of that, it was then creating these anxiety attacks, these panic attacks. And it's not a nice feeling when you just get so worked up.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
it's hard, especially as like a person that's being around people all the time, whether you're coaching or working out or whatever, to be able to like experience all of that while you're surrounded. And also, I know because you're part of our community, like you're somebody that a lot of people look up to here. So it's like
Hmm.
hard also trying to still hold and maintain that image while you're like freaking out on the inside and
Hmm.
like all of the things. It's such a complicated process that yeah, I don't sometimes I'm like, I don't even know how we navigate it. Like I've been there and I'm like, I don't even know how I've dealt with it sometimes because it's just, you just do.
Well, a key thing for me is I keep it real. Like I'll often do posts about like, yep, got completely overwhelmed again and had to like take a step back, or like I'll sometimes post about my PMDD because it's important for people to know that like other people go through things as well, and it's like I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. I'm just going to be real and I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, and that's a great point is that and that's part of the reason we're having this conversation today is just because there's so many things that happen and nobody talks about it because
Hmm.
it can be scary. It can cause a lot of shame for people. It can feel really weird because I think a lot of times we're very much discouraged to talk about these types of things, especially as women, because we're supposed to be perfect and we're supposed to like just be able to do everything, be superwoman, super mom, whatever that looks like for people. And so we just put it all inside. But being able to actually have those open, honest conversations about what we're going through is so, so important for empowering people and in mental health too, not just for women, but just for everybody in general.
And that's why I have those conversations about peri and post menopause too. It's like so many people are still afraid to talk about it. And so for me, it's like I'm going to tell people about symptoms and my own experience and things like that. So people are like, oh, she's going through that too.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I guess coming back, I guess circling back, you made a good natural transition for us there. Coming back to that perimenopause and menopause piece, tell us a little bit more with like the education and stuff that you've had. How does perimenopause and menopause and postmenopause impact mental health specifically?
Yeah, and I mean, like one of the other things about peri and post menopause is not only are we going through this basically life change, we're also midlife. There's a lot of other things going on. So not only are we navigating perimenopause, postmenopause, often there's other things in the mix, like maybe you're quitting your job, or maybe you're retiring, or maybe you're changing your job. Maybe there's financial challenges. For those that have kids, you might have teenagers at home that you're navigating, or the opposite, you might have become an empty nester, and that might be a really hard thing for someone to navigate. Then there could be aging or sick parents, or unfortunately, it could be our own sickness or a spouse's sickness. So there's so much going on at the same time that is also going to impact mental health. And then let's throw in symptoms.
Hmm.
So, like on my intake form for menopause coaching, I have 38 symptoms.
Wow.
Yeah. And some women will experience all of them.
Mhm.
Some women will experience none. It's not very common, but it does happen. And then most women will experience like some or more than some, but not all, right? And then the severity changes from woman to woman, because that's one of the things about the journey. It is so different for everybody.
Right.
Yeah. And like, I especially find with athletes, you can talk to one athlete who's like just cruising through, and then the next athlete's like, I think I woke up and I gained 20 pounds last night. Why isn't
Yeah.
that happening to my friend?
Mhm.
So it's so different for everyone. And so, what I wanted to just kind of, and again, I'm not going to go through 38 symptoms, but I wanted to
Mhm.
just kind of chat about a couple that I just kind of pulled that can have like a huge impact, specifically with regards to athletes and perimenopause and menopause, because otherwise I need to go through all of them. So it's like these can directly or indirectly affect our mental health. But the other key is that affects our performance as well.
Right.
And when our performance is potentially affected, that also affects our mental health. So it's just like this cycle.
Mhm.
Speaking of cycles, like one of them is cycle changes, because if you're an athlete and now you have an irregular cycle, you might be at an event and suddenly you get your period and you're not prepared.
Right.
But I think a big one that can have a huge impact on athletes and is like some women experience really heavy bleeding.
Right.
So if you are experiencing heavy bleeding, it's going to affect like your training, but your energy as well. And so
Mhm.
then it circles back to having that mental health impact, because maybe you can't train as hard or maybe you can't perform as well. Sleep is another big one. We just talked about it.
Mhm. Sleep,
So it's
sleep.
like sleep impacts everything. And I mean, like, is the sleep hormonal or is it because of many other factors, right? But it's like it is sleep challenges is a symptom, and it affects, like they say, 2/3 of women in midlife.
Right.
So when we're not sleeping well, it can cause anxiety, it can create depression, it can decrease performance, it can impact recovery, it can increase our risk of injury. Like, I mean, the list goes on. So the next one that I put on my list is weight gain or not being able to lose weight. And a
Right.
lot of women, like I said before, like they feel like they just gained weight overnight.
Mhm.
And I mean, if you're an endurance athlete and you have gained weight, that's going to impact your running.
Totally.
And then the other one is like that frustration of not being able to lose weight. And like this has a huge impact on our mental health.
Mhm.
I put joint pain in there. So if we're suffering from joint pain and we can't perform as well, again, it circles back to mental health, because people need to realize that when someone is an athlete, whether it's a recreational athlete or a competitive athlete, anything that hinders our performance is going to negatively impact our mental health. And
Of course.
performance doesn't have to mean winning.
Yeah.
Performance might be showing up to CrossFit and like one day you can do all of the movements and then the next day your body's just not working for you properly so you can't. Or you walk into the gym and you're going to be lifting like free weights or using machines and you can't lift as much weight as you did the week before because you haven't slept properly. So it all circles. It's like just this ongoing circle.
Hmm.
Um, Another one that links to joint pain and weight as well is like basically during this time, like muscle loss, muscles being weaker. Maybe you're getting cramps, maybe you're getting aches and pains. So, again, that's circling back to having a huge impact on our performance and our mental health.
Hmm.
Bone loss is another one. So, our like women lose bone mass at a faster rate than men. And a lot of it happens basically in the just before menopause and then after. So, like, if someone gets a diagnosis of osteopenia or osteoporosis and they're a competitive athlete, then their training is going to have to change. Um, Urinary incontinence. If you're a big runner and suddenly you have stress incontinence, so basically the impact of running, that's going to have a huge impact on your mental health because are you going to be able to run as much as you used to? And
Right.
running might be not just a performance thing, it might be like a release for
Right.
if your
Exactly.
anxiety and things like that. Which brings me to like anxiety, depression, panic attacks. So if we are suffering from anxiety or we have depression, where like depression can impact your motivation,
Hmm.
anxiety can impact performance. Another one I put on there was digestive issues.
Hmm.
And this can happen quite a bit with endurance athletes as well, especially with a lot of the like the energy, like foods, calories that are being taken in. But digestive issues during perimenopause can, like, they can cause embarrassment. They can affect our training schedule. The next one I put on there was low energy and fatigue. I mean, again, affecting performance. Um, when we're tired, we're more likely to have like negative self-talk. So like, which is huge when it comes to mental health. Um, we talk about brain fog a lot, but like in perimenopause, but like the one I find the biggest with athletes is more like just like struggling to focus, which then trickles down into struggling to have that motivation.
Right.
And then maybe we miss a workout because of many factors, and then we're beating ourselves up because we missed that. Um, I put heart palpitations in there because it can be like really scary, and that has a huge impact on our mental health. And then the other one I put in there actually was body odor changes
That's an
because
interesting one.
yeah, because it's like again we put like someone might start to feel embarrassed.
Hmm.
Um, and then so then maybe they're not going to train as much, so then that's going to impact their mental health because they're not moving their body as much.
Hmm.
And
I can
I
see
didn't.
that one. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
Oh, I was gonna say I could see that one impacting, especially like the social side too, is because like especially if you've been training with a group and then you have a change in body odor, then all of a sudden you're like embarrassed or scared to be around the
Yeah.
people you usually are and you're isolating, which is always a tank for mental health. Like social isolation is such a huge risk factor for somebody declining in their mental health or already declining. So
Hmm.
yeah, I could see that being a huge one.
Well, and I mean, talking about the group, like I know for me, so like my hot flashes are typically night sweats, but I do get some of them during the day, and they're generally always when I'm working out, coming up to my period,
Ooh,
and I
yeah.
can be like, and I'm a big sweater anyway, and I'll be working out, and I am just, I'm a waterfall,
Oh.
and it is mortifying, and like, thankfully, like I just own up. Like people like I had a coach once, he's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yep, just perimenopause in full force here." So I just joke it off.
Hmm.
But for some women, like that might stop them from going to the gym.
Hmm.
And I mean, I
Totally.
know we're talking specifically like athletes here, but that's a huge thing for women in the workplace too, because it's like if you're having a meeting or you're doing a presentation and you just start pouring in sweat, like maybe that woman will stop doing whatever she's doing at work because she doesn't want to be in that situation.
Which is
So,
terrifying to think because at the age that I would say, like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but that most women start to kind of go through perimenopause, they're at probably really their prime in a lot of areas of their
mhm,
life. Like in endurance sport, women are probably the strongest in their 40s,
yeah.
or like late 30s, early 40s. In work, right? You've been there in your profession for probably 20, 25 years now. You're at your prime, and now you've got this whole other thing happening that's totally sabotaging your performance in all areas of your life.
Yeah, and like I mean, like I probably should have said it earlier, but like the average age of menopause, of the menopause, that moment in time is 52.
Okay.
Um, Most women go through the menopause between 45 and 54,
Okay.
right?
Yeah,
So
that's the
it's like,
prime of
yeah.
life.
And what else is going on at that time? You've got your job and you've got your kids and you've got your parents and then perimenopause, like I mean, some women it might be 2 years, for others it might be 10, it might be more. I mean, I'm already at like 7 or 8 years.
Right.
And they do say that earlier you start the transition period, the longer it's going to go. Yay, me.
Mhm. Yay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm chuckling because like I'm at 31, so when we're recording this, and it's just like one of those things where I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to get older. It's like it's kind of scary to think about
For
of
some
the
women,
changes
though,
that
it's like,
happen.
it's like for some women, it's like almost there's a fear there, but for other women, it's freedom. Like especially if you
Mm,
think if you have a woman who perimenopause, like heavy bleeding, bad hot flashes and night sweats. I mean, I'm just going to use those two.
yeah.
And then suddenly you don't have to deal with a period anymore.
Yeah, that'd
So
be pretty
there
cool.
goes the bleeding.
Hmm.
You spend less money on tampons too.
Yeah.
And then, like, the average age of vasomotor symptoms is like 7 to 8 years. So, for most women, not all, like, they will eventually stop. So then you don't get them anymore. So, it's like freedom because you don't have to have your period anymore. You don't have to worry about getting pregnant.
Hallelujah.
So yeah, for some women it's total freedom. For other women, it's like it might be an emotional deal. Maybe they couldn't have kids. And so
Right.
now that their period's finished, it's like that is now 100% never going to happen, right? So it's such a different journey for everybody.
Yeah, that's a really important thing I think to note is that like everybody's journey is different. And I think you and I had talked about this previously, not here obviously, but um where like people will say like I never went through that.
Yeah.
I never had menopause and you're like, "Sorry, what?"
Yeah, and I
Everybody
def that's
has it.
yeah, and that's definitely like our older generations. They're like, "Oh no, I'm past that," or "I never went through that." And it's like, well, actually, you just didn't have symptoms in perimenopause, but if you were genetically born female with a uterus, you will go through the menopause.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
guaranteed.
Yeah. It's wild to
Yeah,
think about.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so thinking about, I mean, all these hormone changes are happening for a person that's going through perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause. How do you know if like mental health symptoms, but also just other things? Because like lack of sleep, we keep coming back to this, but like lack of
Mhm.
sleep or trouble sleeping is a really common symptom of a lot of other things. So, and like, heavy periods can be a result of other things, or lack of period, especially in athletes, can be, other signs of reds and this type of stuff. So, how do you know if your symptoms, whatever it is, are actually part of your perimenopause or whether
Mhm.
it's something completely unrelated?
And to be honest, if I had the answer to that question, I would probably be really rich. Because to be honest, it's like sometimes we don't know.
Right.
And sometimes it's a combination because, like, there's so many overlaps between symptoms and lifestyle.
Mhm.
But then for athletes, even training load comes into the mix as well. So it's like if we talk about sleep, are the sleep challenges from vasomotor symptoms? which may or may not be from perimenopause. So, because again, it could be from other things. Interestingly enough, vasomotor symptoms are actually a neurological symptom. It's triggered by hormonal changes. But so yeah, is someone not sleeping well because they're having vasomotor symptoms? Or is someone not sleeping well because their partner is snoring?
Mhm.
Or is someone not sleeping well because they're overtraining?
Ding, ding, ding. That's a big one.
Hmm.
We won't talk about that today, but
Yeah.
yes.
Or is someone not sleeping well because their sleep hygiene isn't very good?
Mhm.
Same thing with say digestive issues. Is it like a hormonal thing? Like I have hormonal IBS. I get really bad IBS before my period, but that's it.
Mhm.
Or is it because someone is feeding themselves the wrong fuel? And in particular, endurance athletes suffer with that. I know I mentioned that before.
Mhm.
Or is it more down the eating psychology route and it's because someone is eating on the go all the time and like not chewing their food properly?
Mhm.
Like even with say even weight gain.
Mhm.
Is weight gain, is it like a symptom of perimenopause, or is it because you're not sleeping properly?
Mhm.
Is it because you are overtraining?
Mhm.
Is it because you haven't adjusted your nutrition based on the cycle of life that you're in? I'll touch on that a little bit later. So there is just so many overlaps. So my advice is awareness is key. So, and to be honest, like this is for the women in their 20s and 30s, because if we can be aware of like what's normal for us, then we're going to notice symptoms sooner. Like I have so many people and they're like, well, I don't get any symptoms. And then I'll ask them more questions and they have a bunch of symptoms. They're just not aware of it. And to
Right.
be honest, our cycle is one of those biggest ones. So like every woman should be tracking her cycle. And even if you're on like a Mirena IUD, a hormonal IUD, you are still having a cycle, even if you're not menstruating. So
Mhm.
it's like it could even just be subtle, you like just subtle symptoms of ovulation, just kind of making notes and things like that. So tracking your cycle, because for the majority of women, cycle changes are the first symptom, and that could be change in length between cycles. It could be changing in bleeding, so heavier or lighter. It could be the length of your cycle. Maybe you used to have a 3 day period and now you have a 7 day period. So um, like so tracking your cycle and then just being aware of your body. So if you used to recover from a heavy workout in 24 hours and now you're not recover, it's taking you like 48 to 72 hours, notice it. So and then it's kind of like and then again like looking at lifestyle factors. So it's like are you, is your sleep hygiene right, is your stress management under control? Are you doing the right kind of training? So, and then essentially like bringing in the experts.
Mhm.
So sometimes we need doctors and coaches to help us kind of figure out like, is it perimenopause or is it something else?
Mhm.
Especially because if something's going on that is like impacting our lives in a negative way, if you go to the doctor, they need to do screening. You talked about heavy bleeding before. So it's like, is the heavy bleeding from perimenopause or is it from something else? So
Right.
that the doctor, even in perimenopause, if a woman is bleeding heavy, the doctor should still be screening for uterine cancer.
Right.
Yeah. And if a woman gets heavy bleeding when she's in postmenopause, that's an immediate screening. Or it could be an STI.
Right.
So, yeah, so it's like bringing in the experts, bringing in coaches, whether it's like, say, a menopause coach like me, or whether it's sitting down with your coach for your sport and just going like, you know what, like I've got this, and this going on. Like, do you think it's because I'm maybe in perimenopause, or do you think that I'm overtraining?
Mhm.
Or like, or your coach might just say like, okay, so let's look at a few things, like let's talk about sleep again. So like it is often, and this goes for not just mental health symptoms, this is for all symptoms, because there is so much overlap.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, I wish you could just, yes, it is. No, it's not.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of gray area.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's good to know that because if we start to experience the symptoms, like, I think everybody always goes to worst case scenario. I don't know how many, I mean, maybe I'm unique in this way, but like the first thing that I would think of is not that I'm in perimenopause. The first thing that I would think is probably that I have cancer. You know?
When I went to my doctor when I was like, I think it was in 2017 actually, and I said to her, um, according to Google,
Yeah, she's like,
I
oh
either
no.
have cancer or I'm in perimenopause. Because if you Google it,
Yeah.
everything is cancer.
Oh
And
yeah.
she was just like, okay, we're going to talk more about your symptoms. And yeah, you're in perimenopause.
Yeah.
So, and like, to be honest, Google is the worst.
Yes. Oh my God. Don't Google
Especially now, because
anything.
the first thing that pops up in Google now is like the AI response. And it's just like, no.
It's like the summary of everything. Yeah, it's terrifying. It's just not helpful. Somebody needs to have a conversation with Google and be like, "You are triggering people's anxiety. Please stop."
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
on the note of doctors, like you said earlier that you had the experience of like your one doctor or a doctor saying like you're not in perimenopause. Like
Hmm.
how do you find a doctor that's actually going to be like, or I guess how do you know if your doctor is good or if you should find somebody else, or how do you navigate that?
Yeah, and it's tricky because in med school, like the doctors, well, sorry, the students are given very little and sometimes no training on like menopause. And by that, I mean peri-post menopause care.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, this is an issue because a lot of women are in like menopause, like post menopause for like 50% or more of their life.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually
So
nuts to think about. Yeah.
yeah, so it's concerning that there isn't. In saying that, it is becoming more like, um, well, more common now for doctors to go and do their own additional studies.
Okay.
Yeah. So, for example, here in the Bow Valley, we're very, very fortunate that we do have a GP who now specializes in menopause care.
Nice.
So she's gone and done that extra training herself, but that was because when she went through her like her perimenopause journey, she was like, "What is happening to me?"
Hmm.
Um, I like my own GP. Um, she doesn't have like a specific like menopause certification, but she has done all of her own research. Probably helps that she's like in obstetrics too, so there is that little bit more like women's health focus. So, but unfortunately, a lot of GPs, you're going to go to them and they're either not going to be educated or some of them just aren't comfortable doing the care, which I respect because they're
Hmm.
like, this is out of my, it's not even technically out of their scope. It's just not part of their knowledge base and they'll refer. So it's like doing your research on like basically finding a doctor who specializes in menopause care and like basically women's health and wellness and hormones. So because it's tricky. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any
Yeah.
sort of a like database or anything? Like, is there a training program where you can like go online and search like, I
That
don't know.
I'm not actually
Yeah.
sure of.
Yeah. Okay. Just curious to
Yeah.
see if there's something like that. There should be. That would be nice.
Yeah. No, I'm actually not sure. I'd have to look that one up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah.
If I can find anything, I'll post it in the show notes. But
Yeah.
yeah, we'll see what we can figure out. So kind of coming back into the mental health side piece of things. For an athlete that's going through perimenopause or postmenopause, obviously we need to take pretty particular care of our mental health because as we talked about earlier, like symptoms, whether directly or indirectly, are going to impact that. How would you like, how would you take care of your mental health differently as somebody that's in that stage of their life versus somebody who is younger and in that premenopause kind of phase?
Yeah. And I mean, like, essentially, like what we got away with in our 20s and 30s, it may, maybe it doesn't serve us anymore in our 40s and beyond. And that goes for everything, not just mental health.
Right.
Like nutrition is a big one. So, like, I can't express enough how prioritizing self-care is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
Especially when we throw in what I mentioned before about like not only are we going through these hormonal changes, but we're also maybe dealing with teenagers, or we're dealing with aging and sick parents, or job changes, or financial difficulties. So there is so much else going on. So like prioritizing self-care is key, and that can be a huge challenge for some women, especially women who have families, like who have kids,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Because it's like mom doesn't come first. The kids come first, right?
Right.
So, like, but if we don't take care of ourselves, it is impossible to take care of others. We will
Right.
do it for a little bit, and then we're going to hit a wall, and it's not going to end well. So, like prioritizing self-care, one of the big things in there is like rest is key. Like we have to prioritize rest, and yes, that includes sleep, but it also includes like training rest, and like alone time.
Hmm.
And then another big thing is boundaries.
Who
Yeah,
who would have thought boundaries would come up in a conversation about menopause?
right. And
They're
it's like
everywhere.
we have to, because otherwise everything just starts compounding, and our basically our capacity to cope just goes way down. So we have to set those boundaries. So, and boundaries are different for everybody.
Mhm.
And I just presented last weekend, I think it was, and like boundaries are tricky because boundaries come at a cost. Every boundary comes at a cost.
Yeah.
So where, and I mean that cost might be, it might be a financial cost, um, it might be a time cost. But most often it's an emotional cost.
Hmm.
So like because we're saying no, and then we have that guilt.
Right.
So there is often a like an emotional cost to that boundary, but we have to have those boundaries. And I mean, for one woman, that might be having a boundary around like this is my workout time.
Hmm.
For another woman, it might be a boundary around um, taking on less work.
Right.
So, but we need to do these things to make sure that we can like function as a human.
Hmm.
And when we don't have these boundaries, it can make our symptoms worse.
Yeah.
Another thing, um, when we go through this transition is for a lot of women, we need to adapt our training
Hmm.
because our training needs are different. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And then basically, it comes down to awareness again. So, awareness of our lifestyle, awareness of our training, awareness of how our job is impacting us. So, really being aware of all the other factors in our life and awareness of our symptoms of perimenopause or menopause, um, so that we can essentially like manage all of that to minimize mental health impact.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think the other thing that I would add there too, and I mean, obviously I haven't gone through quite through this yet, but the other piece I've seen just in other women that are in my life is self-compassion, because
Mm,
there's so many changes that happen, and
mhm,
you're kind of transforming into a completely different person, really. I mean, you're obviously at your core, you're still the same, but there's so many things that are different. And especially like even we talked about earlier with like for example, being in your job and feeling like you're not being able to perform as well, or, you're starting to say slow down in your sport or whatever that is, we need to know that like we have to be compassionate towards ourselves during this time because being hard on yourself is going to be an external stressor, whether you think it is or not. It's a stressor, and that stress impacts your hormones hugely, which is going to like decrease estrogen even more and all of like progesterone and things. So it's just like remembering that coming from that place instead of just like being angry and frustrated with yourself. It's okay to
mhm,
feel those emotions, but also then being able to sit with that and be like, it's okay.
mhm,
Okay. Be if you like, it's always the easiest thing to remember about self-compassion is like that piece about If somebody else told you they were going through the exact same thing, what would you say to them? And you wouldn't say, like, if you told me about your journey, I wouldn't say, Fiona, you're a lazy piece of crap. Like, don't let those hot flashes get in your way. Like, that's just ridiculous. Like, you shouldn't be embarrassed about that. Like, I would never say that to you. So don't you dare say that stuff to yourself either, because that is not going to help on your insides either. All of the hormones are affected by that stuff too. So,
I always say if you wouldn't say it to your best friend, don't say it to yourself.
mhm.
And
Which
I
is
mean,
tricky. Sometimes we're hard on our best friends, you know?
uh, I love
Like
that
we
you
get
brought
to be
that up
blunt
though
with those
too.
people.
I love that you brought that up though too, because like say body image, like
Hmm.
is huge because especially if a woman is gaining weight and her body
Hmm.
composition is changing, um, then it's like we often think of like body image and like disordered eating and things like that for younger generations, like and men and women,
Hmm.
all genders, I should say. But like it's huge for women going through menopause, it's huge because it's like learning how to accept their body changes, and
Hmm.
that's like that self-compassion piece comes in huge.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and especially in endurance sport because body image is such a thing. Like, I mean, I remember as a young person standing on the beach in Maui at the Xterra World Championships and being there for the first time, and I felt so fat because everybody has no boobs, no body fat, nothing. They're
Yeah.
like skin and bones. And when that change, like if that changes for you, like I think I'm a healthy weight and all these things, and I am not fat, but just like that comparison
Mhm.
piece and all the things that come into play there. And if you go from being maybe somebody like me or being that person that doesn't have body fat, and then that starts to change for you, and you have to stand beside all of these people that are in this type of I don't want to say shape, but like you know what I mean. Their bodies are such a way. I
Yeah.
can't like it change that change would be so hard.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. So I reference to this earlier, but for our male listeners out there, who bless you if you've gotten this far, I'll maybe have to put it in the show notes of when this question comes in, but I hope that you
Yeah.
will still listen to the whole thing anyways. But for our male listeners, you're going to have somebody in your life that goes through this at some point because all women do. So whether that's your wife, your mom, your sister, your colleagues, your training partners, whoever that might be, how do you suggest that men start to actually support the women in their lives through this stage of their life? And we've talked about a little bit of what they can expect, but like what kinds of things can you expect to see?
Yeah, and I mean, I love this question because so often, like, I mean, I talk about menopause all the time, and I'll have so many guys say to me, they're like, "Oh, that's not applicable to me," and I'm like, "Actually, it is because I guarantee you will know a woman at some point that goes through menopause."
Mhm.
And like you said, it's like wife, sister, I mean, mother, yeah, if you're younger, yeah. Workplace is huge, or maybe it's your teammate if you're on a team sport, or maybe it's your training partner. So it's like you are going to go through this with them. Like
Mhm.
you're going to be there, you're going to see it. Um, and I mean, my husband like lives menopause through me. So it's like he's the
He
guy
has
who's
it
like,
too.
I'm like, oh, I'm so hot. And he's like, oh, let me go and get like my big sweater or whatever. He's like, you can open the door or like brain fog. He's like, what are you trying to say? I'm like, ah, because I can't remember in the middle of a sentence. Or the other day, couldn't find my car.
Oh my gosh.
He's
Oh
like, is your
no.
car on the driveway? And I was like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, hang on a minute. Did I park it on the driveway when I got home last night? I'm like, no, it's on the street. No, it's on the driveway. I can't remember. And it's on the driveway. And then I used my remote starter and he went to check the mail. And I was like, I didn't hear my car starting. Like, did it start? And he's like, it's not on the driveway.
Yeah.
So like they experience it. And I like to be honest, like I would say like if it is your spouse, and I mean if it's like male, female, the wife, if you have like two women in a relationship or a marriage, you could have two women going through like perimenopause at the same time, experiencing things completely different.
Right.
So when it's like directly in that like spouse relationship, Like, I think like some of the biggest things that are going to impact our relationship are sleep.
Hmm.
So like maybe like I'm having hot flashes and night sweats, but Chris isn't. So
Hmm.
it's like I need a different temperature, right? So it's like,
Right.
or maybe I'm like, I didn't sleep well, so excuse my language, I'm a bitch.
Yeah.
You can beep that out if you need. Um,
Yeah.
the other thing is like that witnessing of like mood swings, depression, anxiety. And that can be really hard for the men in these women's lives or women in these women's lives
Mhm. Mhm.
because they feel helpless and they don't know how to deal with it. But I feel like awareness is key because it's like if a woman is having a mood swing and it's like it's not directly related to you. So it's like rather than jumping down their throat and making it worse, it's like, okay, I know what's going on here. So, like, how are we going to work with this? Another huge thing with relationships and menopause is sex. So,
Mhm.
like, perimenopause and postmenopause can have a huge impact on a woman's libido.
Mhm.
And another big impact with regards to sex is a lot of women suffer from vaginal dryness.
Right.
And then, like, sex isn't everything in a relationship, but for some people, it is a huge part of a relationship.
Mhm.
So these things come back to that direct relationship impact. And another one I put in there is like weight and body image.
Mhm.
Because I went to an amazing session at the Congress on sex, and like they were saying that like obviously like libido, vaginal dryness have a huge impact, but the way a woman sees her body also
Mhm.
has a huge impact. And say if a woman you might have been leaner all her life and suddenly she's gained 20 pounds, she doesn't feel comfortable naked. Like that's
Right.
going to have an impact on her relationship, right? So,
Mhm.
but then like it's going outside of that direct spousal relationship. And by spouse, I mean like it could be a girlfriend, a husband, like, oh, sorry, a wife. It could be like a de facto whatever. But then just for in general, like say if you're 20 and your mom is like 45 and she's going through hot flashes,
Mhm.
it's like being aware of what the symptoms are
Mhm.
and then having empathy and compassion.
Mhm.
So rather than just like, what do you mean you didn't sleep well? Just go to bed earlier. Or like, oh, you're so moody today. It's like having empathy and like meeting them where they're at.
Mhm.
And I think another key is like understanding that like this is a big moment in a woman's life journey.
Mhm.
So it's like going through that transition with the woman, and kind of just like being her sidekick.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just like creating a safe space for that too, because it's like we touched on this a bit earlier, but it can be so uncomfortable to talk about it and just like tell somebody that you're going through something like this. Like, even I'm just thinking about like I have a male coach, and if there's any, like, even for me, and I'm not in perimenopause yet, but if I need to take a rest day because I have period cramps, like I always feel weird talking about it. And it's not because my coach isn't great, because he is, but it's
Mm,
just like as a guy, make it comfortable for that just to exist in this, so that because it's not shameful. It's something every woman is going through, all of this stuff, whatever it is. So it's like it doesn't have to be gross, it doesn't have to be awkward. It's just like, I see you, how can I help?
hmm. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, you're so right. Because like, for a lot of women, having a conversation with their partner about saying like, I didn't sleep well last night, so I'm not in the mood. Plus, I have like vaginal dryness and I've gained some weight. I'm just not interested in sex right now. Like, not many
Mhm.
women are going to be okay having that conversation.
Yeah, and sometimes the awareness piece, right? Like they're like, I'm not in the mood, but they're not like connecting all of those dots, or like they know that they're feeling that way, but even if you say that out loud, that makes it real.
Yeah.
And
I,
that's
I think
really
another thing,
scary.
like, actually, now that I think of it, is like not taking things personally.
Yes.
So, yeah. And just like, and again, it's being aware of the symptoms, right? So it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, not taking things personally and, um, yeah, just having that empathy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge one, because like you said, with like mood swings or like the bitchiness that might come out from the lack of sleep or whatever, like it's not on the whoever partner, other person in whatever relationship it is, it's not on you. It's not about you. It's just the experience that the person is having. I mean, that really goes for anything in our lives, is like not taking things personally is relieves a heck of a lot of suffering if we if we
Mm-hmm.
can let some of that go, but it's really, really hard. Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So many good notes there. But yeah, gentlemen, be aware of this stuff. Don't hide and just like put your head in the dirt here and think like I don't have to go through this, so I don't need to know anything. Like be aware. The women around you are going through things and everybody is going through things.
Just have
Um,
lots of layers ready so that when it's -40 out and she needs to open the door because she's hot flashing, you
yeah.
can just, my husband goes upstairs and gets his Udi.
That's yeah, brilliant. Every man should have an Oodie. There you go. Yep. Whatever works, right? Yeah, because it's just it's a tough time and it's
Yeah.
you can't necessarily you can't understand it because you're not going to go through it, but being able to just like ride the roller coaster with a person is the best thing you can do because ignoring it is only going to make that the other half the woman feel so much shame and that's not going to help with anything either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in terms of endurance athletes, so lots of runners and triathletes listening to this podcast in particular, what specific strategies might you suggest for endurance sport, specifically for somebody that's navigating perimenopause or postmenopause, so that a person can keep feeling really good and also performing at their best, whether that may not be as fast as a person once was, but at their best ability?
Yeah, and I know I mentioned it before, and it's like, unfortunately, what worked for us in our 20s and 30s, for example, may not work for us anymore, 40 and above, 40
Mhm,
and beyond, I should say. And unfortunately, like endurance athletes are often affected in a big way from perimenopause, like say more than like say someone who's just a pure strength athlete, think an Olympic lifter. Um, and unfortunately, I would say, the main way that they're affected is weight gain.
mhm,
Yeah, and I know I said it before that like you can have one endurance athlete will have nothing, and then the next one is like, I just gained 20 pounds and now I can't run like my ultra marathons and stuff.
mhm.
Um, and so the big thing for that, and like, sorry, listeners, you may not want to hear this, but um,
Give it to
like
us straight.
we got away with these things when we were younger, but for many of us in perimenopause, like too much moderate intensity work, so that's your endurance training.
Zone two.
Yeah, it increases our cortisol and our sympathetic nervous system drive. So I'm going to reference the amazing Dr. Stacy Sims here. Um, so she basically describes it that what this means is we feel tired but wired,
Mhm.
and then often will result in weight gain.
Right.
Um, and it's because like the hormonal changes during perimenopause, like if we keep training the way we used to, it will often result in fat gain instead of the body burning fat for energy.
Right.
And then on top of that, like the longer you go, the more cortisol you're creating and the less carbohydrates you're burning for fuel just because of the way the body is now functioning.
Right.
So essentially like like yeah, we need like and it's tricky because a lot of times, and this goes for all women at all stages of their lives, but more so in peri and post menopause, they're like, oh, I'm gaining weight, I need to move more and eat less.
Yeah.
And unfortunately all that does is make it worse.
Mhm.
So like the biggest thing for endurance athletes is that training needs to adapt based on this stage of our life. So we don't want to remove the endurance work, but we need to scale it back.
Mhm.
And then we need to add in heavy strength training. I'm going to
Mhm.
quote Dr. Stacy Sims again. She calls it LHS. Am I allowed to swear?
Yes, go for
Okay.
it.
So she calls it LHS, which is lift heavy shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then we need to do HIIT training, which to a lot of endurance athletes, they're like, what? I need to lift heavy weights and I need to do like hit intervals, but I'm a marathon runner or
Mhm.
I'm a triathlete or an Ironman. So it's not just an adapting of training, it's an adapting the mindset towards the stimulus that your body now needs.
Right.
So by doing this, basically what we do is we're scaling back on the moderate intensity work, which is going to reduce that cortisol response. We're adding in the strength training, which is going to improve power.
Hmm.
And then we're adding in the HIIT training, which is going to help with like it's going to help with body composition. It's still going to help with your endurance performance. So we're not like again we're not taking out that endurance training because it's a huge part of the piece.
Right.
But we're just kind of like, but if we kept the endurance training here and then we added in the strength training and we added in the HIIT, we're just going to keep adding on to that cortisol and basically that sympathetic nervous system dominance.
Right.
Um, so instead, we scale back to add in,
Right. That makes
right?
sense.
And then like I do highly recommend like working with a coach on and like typically like at this stage of our life, we're looking at like non-linear periodization.
Hmm.
But like working with a coach who understands how to basically coordinate the endurance with the strength training and the HIIT.
Right.
So like working with a coach. Um, and the other key with regards to training is prioritizing recovery.
Right.
So like when we took periodization, like we have recovery periodization as well. So we want to have recovery factored into our training, but then also we come back to sleep. Our
Right.
bodies recover when we sleep,
Mhm.
and recovery is essential for this adaptation process. So yeah, maybe we got away in our 30s with no rest days,
Hmm.
but now we can't.
Right.
So like rest is key. And that doesn't mean like having like I mean, for some people it might be having like a couple of days off. For others, it might be just like a deload week factored into that periodization model.
Right.
Um, and then the other things that we need to look at with regards to all athletes, but endurance athletes, is nutrition needs to change a little bit as well.
Okay.
So again, what we got away with when we were younger may not work for us anymore. Um, and I cannot stress enough how important protein is at this time in our life.
Hmm.
The body uses protein differently. That's a whole other podcast. But so we need that protein. And then we want to look at eating to our circadian rhythm.
Hmm.
So basically, eating when we wake up and then trying not to eat like a couple of hours before bedtime so that the body then gets into its sleep mode. And then eating around our workouts and nutrient timing. So we need that protein pre-workout. We need that protein post-workout. Yes, we need all the other goodies too, but like protein has to be the focus, especially for us as athletes. And then hydration as well. Interestingly
Hmm.
enough, a lot of women when they get older, and I'm one of these women, we lose our sense of thirst. Like I
Interesting.
know for me, like I never get thirsty.
Hmm.
And then like so we need to make sure that we're hydrating our body properly, but especially for endurance athletes, it's the electrolytes
Right.
because plain water just isn't enough.
Right.
And to be honest, there's no plain water in the body.
Yes. No, there's not.
So like dumping plain water in there, but what's it replacing, right? So it's like making sure we have those electrolytes, especially for endurance.
Hmm.
And then if I circle back to nutrition, like, and this is very specific for endurance athletes versus say me with like CrossFit, right? Because a lot of the calories that an endurance athlete is used to having is like say your sugar shots and things like that. So
Hmm.
often they won't service when we get older
Hmm.
because it's not what the body needs, but also it can cause digestive upset.
Right.
So it can cause like an imbalance in the gut microbiome.
Hmm.
So yeah, so it's like we need to train, of course we need to train. We need to change the way that we're fueling our bodies.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's huge. Yeah, and there's
Yeah.
so many really good gems there. Like training needs to change significantly. but also lifestyle, and which is all the things that you're covering there, need
Mhm.
to change a lot too. So it's really important just to make sure that you do have people in your lives, professionals, coaches, physicians, whoever that is, that's going to be able to support you through that, because otherwise you're going to be at that place where you're not performing at your best, whether that's in sport or in life, and you're just going, your mental health will tank as a result of that, because you just feel completely incompetent, you feel hopeless. There's just like all of these feelings that can really come up, and that um those things are just they're just the red flags, we'll call them, for going into things like depression and anxiety, which is the last thing any of us needs, athletes or
Mhm.
not. So yeah.
Well, for so much of it, many of us too, like our like our training is like it's our release.
Hmm.
It's but if we don't change things, then it ends up working against us because
Yeah.
then we get to the point where we can't actually participate in our training or our events, like our races and things like that, because of the changes that are happening in our body. And then maybe we're injured, or maybe we're completely exhausted because we're not resting. And so then now we can't train, or we can't do our event that we've just been training for 6 months for.
Hmm.
And then it circles back to that negative mental health response that we're going to get from that, and that sense of failure. And we don't want to have that. Like
Hmm.
this is prime time in our life. And like we don't have to suffer through this. There's things we can do for our symptoms. And then if we adapt our training, if we adapt our nutrition, we're going to be able to continue to perform at a high level
Hmm.
for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And for like any endurance athletes that know, some of the female athletes that are in the field right now, I am not as familiar in like running and stuff, but like in triathlon, we've got Melanie McQuaid, who's like
Mhm.
still
Yeah.
competing at the Ironman World Championships at what, 52, I think she
Yeah.
is now,
Early
and,
50s.
like
Yeah.
crushing it. Like, so it's possible. It's just that you have to be able to understand how you need to adapt to make sure that you're working with the body that you have, not the body that you used to have, and the systems and all that
Hmm.
kind of stuff.
I like that one.
Yeah, you can steal it. You can quote me.
Yeah. Yeah.
This was such a great conversation, Fiona. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wealth of knowledge. How can people get in touch with you if they're interested in coaching, or at least learning from you passively, if that's what the route that they kind of go? But yeah, how can people connect with you and find out more?
Yeah. So my website is fionagroves.com.
Mhm.
I'm going to be, all my packages are going to be on there pretty soon here. I'm doing a little bit of a relaunch with the menopause coaching.
Mhm.
And then people can sign up for my newsletter actually through my website. So that's on my Connect tab. And then my Instagram handle is Coach Fiona Groves. My Instagram is very much like it's CrossFit, it's bodybuilding, it's perimenopause, it's mountain life, it's everything.
Mhm.
Just because I'm a 45-year-old woman in perimenopause in the prime of my life, and I'm living my best life in my mid 40s, and it's all part of it, right? The
Mhm.
training is part of my journey. Perimenopause is part of my journey. Like everything is part of it. So, yeah, and then people can also email me if they want. My email is fitbyfionacoaching@gmail.com.
Perfect. And I will drop all of those links and everything in the show notes as well, so you can pop down there and connect with Fiona if that's what you want to do. But at the very least, follow her on social media, because like she said, she just puts it all out there and it's very honest. It's not one of those fakey accounts of influencer. She's just real on there, which is really cool. So yeah.
I'm an educator, not an influencer.
Hey, I like that. Oh, I'm here. That's why I'm gonna quote you now. Great. Well, thank you so much, Fiona. And yeah, give her a follow. And if that's hire her as a coach if you are looking for some support through the menopause journey. Thank you so much, and we will talk again soon. Thanks for tuning in to the Athlete Mental Health Podcast. I hope that today's episode has got you thinking and has inspired you to take action towards improving your mental health. If you're looking for more tools and insights on boosting mental health and sport performance, join me in my Instagram community at Ignite Health Coaching. Be sure to drop me a DM to say hi and let me know what your biggest takeaways have been so far. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get notified every time I drop a new episode. sending you all the strength and energy that you need to crush your training, racing, and life.